Hello, viewer on YouTube. Welcome once again to what's going to be a fantastic chat with Dr. Shayna Skakoon-Sparling, all the way in beautiful Toronto. Shayna, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So, viewer, first of all, thank you so much for pressing play. And I realize that we don't generally press play on content relating to loneliness unless you kind of sort of maybe possibly think that you might be experiencing just a twinge of loneliness. So I want to recognize the courage that it took to press play on this. And you've chosen to press play on a conversation that I feel is going to be so helpful because it will speak to Shayna's area of specialness. I talk the English good right now, which bodes well for a cracking podcast. But Shayna, yeah, like what you do, and I'll ask you to introduce what you do shortly, but is essentially like something that we see everywhere in our communities, in interactions with other gay and queer men, but also quite possibly, potentially have done ourselves. So yeah, it's going to be a great conversation. And viewer, I will say Shayna's had a few bit of IT issues. So if we get some freezing or whatever, let's just blame the Canadian Telecommunications Authorities. Shayna and I, there goes my ability to speak again, or inability to speak again. Shayna and I actually were presented on a panel together last October for a Human Connection Conference in Canada. And I'll share this with you, viewer. This gutted me, let me just say, when Shayna told me this, but I've been wanting to have Shayna on the podcast for months now. And I reached out and I'm like, hi, you might remember me. I was kind of fanboying, but you might remember me. Like we did this thing. She's like, no, I don't remember you. But Shayna, you had a really good reason why you didn't remember me.
I didn't remember I barely remembered being on the panel because I was a new mother. And I mean, I still feel like I'm a bit of a new mother. I still don't really know what I'm doing, but a lot of sleep deprivation, a lot of little tiny baby. And I had agreed to so many things when I was pregnant, thinking that, oh yeah, that baby, that's not a big deal. Like it'll sleep, I'll sleep, and then I'll do work and be great. And then, yeah, I was showing up to panels and I'm pretty sure I said a couple of smart things. I don't remember what I said. I don't remember what you said. I attended board meetings. I needed to review the notes afterwards because I didn't remember what had happened in the board meeting. So yeah, don't do a lot. Don't plan to do a lot of things if you just had a baby.
No, and our sons, they're twins. They turned 16 a few weeks ago. So I've been sort of doing this parenting thing now for a while. I still don't know what I'm doing. So once you crack the code, please let me know as well. But Shayna, you good to go?
Yes.
Excellent. Viewer, I hope you're good to go. I have my coffee here, keeping warm in the thermos because it's cold here today. But I'm really glad that you decided to press play for this conversation. And Shayna, it's just great to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm excited to be here, especially now that I'm better rested, and I'm going to remember that we've met and chatted for sure. I promise.
I'll just try and do something outrageous and outlandish. So, you'll have nothing but, that conversation. I remember that. Yeah. All right. So I'm pressing record on the little machine down here that will record our voices. And I think we're good to go.
Great.
Dr. Shayna Skakoon-Sparling, welcome to Connection Over Coffee.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm excited to be here. I've got my coffee. I'm all set.
And you showed me the coffee mug
Oh, yes.
a little earlier, but it's full of like it contains wisdom. Can you read what it is, what it
It
says?
says it's only cold if you're standing still, which feels very appropriate as Australia moves into winter.
I know, I know. As I'm sitting here, listener, viewer, I have a hot water bottle on my back, and it's keeping me nice and toasty because it's a bit chilly here this morning. But Shayna, it is what is it? The evening for you over in Toronto, and I'm so just bloody chuffed in possibly like one of the most Australian things that I could say. I'm really chuffed to have this conversation with you because we're going to be talking about something that is your area of specialty and your research of like your area of research. And I know that it's going to give me, it's going to give the viewer, listener something to think about, something to support them in, and also like in how loneliness shows up and drives behaviors in a way that perhaps we weren't really aware of before pressing play. But before we get into all of that, just a couple of small questions that I want to ask you. Like, who are you and how did you get to be here?
That is a great set of questions. I am, oh gosh, who am I? This feels very existential. But I'm an applied social psychologist, and I'm incoming faculty. I'm an incoming associate professor of psychology at the University of Guelph. But the thing about a lot of people haven't heard about applied social psychology and like what is that? Like I don't sit down with patients. I'm not a clinical psychologist. The way that I do my work is I take social science, social psychology problems or theories, and I apply them to real world issues, real world problems. So I don't just like hang out and be like, okay, but like, what is this concept? I instead like I take somebody else who's already done that work, I read their work, and then I'm like, okay, but how does that apply to these people that I know? How does this apply to the people that I work with, I mean, so a lot of my work is with sexual minority men, and I'm not a sexual minority man. So I work a lot with community advisory boards that are made up of members of the sexual minority men's community, members of people who serve this community in terms of like STI and HIV prevention. And so I sit down with them and I say, okay, I feel like this theory applies to this problem. Am I right? Am I wrong? What kinds of questions do I need to do? Should we ask? Like, what's going to make this relevant to the community? And they help me form good research projects that hopefully help people, hopefully help real people. I
Mm,
feel like that was
I
a very complicated explanation.
God no, God no. I love asking that big question, and then you're right, it is an existential question. And I love asking it sort of straight off the bat. I love asking it, but I hate answering it myself when I'm asked that. So, it is possibly, a reflection of, how I like to ask the big questions to get us uncomfortable in a nice way. But I want to say that, well, right off the bat, thank you. Thank you for the work that you're doing and how you're doing it. Because the work, as I'm sure that we'll get into, really does speak to that kind of point of intersection, like in our words, thoughts, and actions that bring us to specific points where we might not actually be making wise choices.
Yeah.
And that you're doing it in the way that you do it, which, speaks to collaboration, and applying your own kind of intellectual curiosity and personal curiosity to improve the lives of humans, however those humans identify. I mean, it just feels to me what it's all about.
And that's why I picked this career path, because I wanted to do work that felt important, that felt meaningful.
There's a question there. I just got chills because I say the same thing. Like, I will say, I did not grow up, when a teacher goes around the classroom when you're in like year 9 or year 10, and you go to, often here in Australia in year 10, you go and do work experience. And like your homeroom teacher or whatever was like, well, where are you going to go and do work experience? I didn't go and say I'll do work experience as a global loneliness thought leader. I went and did work experience at the local solicitor's office. And
I did mine at a hotel. I did high school in the Caribbean in a British protectorate. So I went through the GCSE's year program, and I also had to do a work experience. And I hated working at the hotel.
Well, it was very effective. Both you and I worked out what careers we didn't want. And so I'm fascinated. I'm so fascinated by how we get to be here, doing what we do, and how we get to how we got to be doing this. So my question to you is, how did you get to be doing this work right now? And what were some of the influences? And really curious about decision points where you decided, no, actually, I could do this, but I want to do that. That led you to do what you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, because I feel like I can really track like the paths that my research has taken, because I initially started out looking at so my initial question is, I wanted to understand, why do we do things that we later on are like, oh damn, I should not have done that. That was a risk, and like I don't know. I don't feel good about that. Like that wasn't I wanted to understand, like, okay, like in like my cold cognition, like outside of the situation, I'm like, that wasn't a good idea. But in the situation, I was like, this is a great idea and I should probably do it. Like, why, what's happening there? So I wanted to understand, like, what's happening in that situation that you're like, sure, I'm going to do this thing, that later on you're like, that, no, I would have told myself, don't do that thing. So I wanted to understand, like, what's happening in that situation. So what I started out looking at was sexual arousal. How does sexual arousal influence us to agree to things that we're like, maybe when you're not aroused, you're like, oh, that, I don't know about that. That wasn't a good idea. But when you're in the situation, you're like, this is fine. I'm in the moment. I love this. Sure, I'll agree to that. And so I did a whole set of studies in grad school, trying to like dig into that question. And then as I started like digging deeper in that question, I was like, okay, well, it's like, you're not just like sexually turned on or turned off, and then that's the only thing that's happening. Like, it matters who you're with. It matters how much you know them, how well you trust them, but also like some internal things matter too, like how badly you wanted to connect with them, how important you feel that it is that you have that feeling of intimacy with that person, which kind of led me to looking at things like relationship motivation, partner familiarity. And then from there, I was like, okay, but like, what's a big part of being motivated to be in a relationship? And I started doing more research and more work with sexual minority men and sexual minority men communities. And a thing that popped up a lot was like being motivated to like just feel some connection with another person. And I read a lot of great qualitative papers where they interviewed people, and people talked about like, well, yeah, I didn't really want to do that thing with this guy, but I was worried that if he said no, then I was going to go home alone, and then I was going to feel really sad about being home alone. And that really started making this area, like looking at research and looking at how feeling lonely can get us to agree to stuff that outside of that moment you'd be like, oh, I don't know about that, because you just are desperately want to not feel lonely and to feel a connection with another person, even if you know, like when you wake up the next morning, you're like, oh, actually I feel worse about everything now because I don't like that I did that thing last night. It's like I want to understand more about how this is happening, but also how we can stop that from happening. How we can get people to like, it's fine to go out and have sex with lots of people, but I want people to be doing that because it's fun and fulfilling for them, not because they're trying to get away from bad feelings instead of dealing with the bad feelings.
Yeah. I just want to give that some space and time to sink in, because that is everything. And in my work, we know that loneliness is really sort of complex and complicated, and sometimes I put a lot of effort into simplifying the complexity, not dismissing the complexity, but simplifying the language around it so we can actually speak about it and relate to the complexity. Because trying to simplify loneliness, like the beauty of loneliness and the good stuff of the loneliness is in the complexity, because your unique blend when you experience loneliness, Shayna, is different to mine. There's some commonalities in that, but all the ingredients and the secret herbs and spices, like there's some common ingredients, but then there's some secret herbs and spices for your own unique recipe of loneliness as distinct to mine. But in looking at those commonalities of the human condition of loneliness, one of the things that I say to my audience here at the Loneliness Guy, and viewer, listener, you may remember that I say this sometimes, but I'm going to say it again if you haven't heard it. But if you leave a hookup feeling emptier than when you went in, that was not the connection that you needed. Yeah. And one of the things about loneliness, one of the really shitty, difficult things about loneliness, and I'm unapologetic in saying that it's shitty and difficult, because we can spend our lives wanting to avoid the discomfort of what generally, in my experience, is a few moments of discomfort in talking about your loneliness. But one of the things that I so frequently see is people not wanting to reflect on the loneliness that they're feeling, or the lack of connection, and that might be coming up in regret, might be coming up in feelings of guilt, shame, all those kind of feelings that we don't like to have. But the clue to getting the connection that we need, it lies in the loneliness. Because your unique blend of loneliness, Shayna, your unique blend of loneliness, viewer and listener, and my unique blend of loneliness is telling us collectively about the connection that we need as individuals and collectively. And shutting down that discomfort is so tempting, because it's awful. It's so horrid. Yeah. It's so horrid that, we reach for the phone, we go to Grindr for another hookup, we go to the gram, we go to lose ourselves, checking all the ticks on the talk. We go, we do all the things. We might open up Pornhub or Tumblr or whatever it is to kind of numb ourselves away from this. Binge watch TV, whatever it is, whatever your poison, your distract poison, your avoidance poison is. And that's understandable, because sometimes this stuff is really hard, because that need to connect, like genuine, authentic, soul nourishing connection where you feel seen and feel heard, so you feel that you belong, is so innate. We all must have it. Yeah.
It's a fundamental human need.
Yeah.
I feel like I write that a lot in every paper. It's a fundamental human need. It is. You need it like you need water.
Yeah. Yeah. Interestingly, I was on Australian TV here sharing my loneliness story. And the final question that I was asked, and if you're in Australia, it was on SBS Insight. You can watch it on demand. And not yet, but maybe by the time this episode comes out, there'll be a YouTube link where the episode will be on YouTube. And if you're not in Australia, you can watch it without the need for a VPN. But Kumi, the host, she asked me, like, do I still feel lonely? And I'm like, oh God, yes. God, yes. Like, I'm the loneliness guy. I'm the lonely diplomat. Like, loneliness is my thing now, but I still feel lonely. Like, I'm better at recognizing loneliness, but it still feels shit. It still feels horrible, and I wish it would go away sometimes. But what I'm better at doing now, and this is what I say, and Shayna, what you're saying here is that, I'm recognizing that this is a need. This is a need, and it is as fundamental as eating food and drinking water to our survival, to my survival. And shaming myself, heaping judgment when I'm already feeling pretty shit about how I'm feeling shit and I'm unworthy of love and belonging in that moment, actually is doing the equivalent of shaming myself for feeling hungry, shaming myself for feeling thirsty. And also sometimes there's the element, and Shayna, I wonder if, like, when you experience loneliness, you get a sense of, like, physician, heal thyself. Like, I know the theory of this. Why am I feeling this? And so, it gets to that point that you're just like, oh, like, in moving through loneliness, it's learning to listen to what it says in the same way that we learn to listen to what our hunger is telling us, and learning to listen to what our thirst tells us. And we need to, when we're thirsty, we could have, half a liter of water or something like that, and scull that and feel better. Or, we could have half a liter of beer, or half a liter of, like, a vodka cruiser, or whatever it is. Like, your thirst is sated, but is that actually the thing that's actually going to help you? So when it comes to loneliness, one of the things that we often see, and I'm not going to say I'm pure as the driven snow here, this has happened to me, right? But shit, connection must mean sex. And the way that, as a gay man, we feel connection when we're feeling unseen, feeling unheard, sometimes we reach for that connection through Grindr or through Scruff, or, whatever the app is of the moment, and go, the only way that I can scratch that itch is through sex. Do you see?
It leads to a lot of unhealthy things, like worrying a lot about your appearance, or feeling needing to feel desired and wanted, which, I mean, everybody does need to feel desired and wanted. That is but, like, there's a point where that becomes a fixation, and it's not useful for you. It's not benefiting.
Yeah. Yeah. And that point, that tipping point, I'm sure in your work there's, like, a proper name for that moment, but that point of decision, or that tipping point where a behavior goes from being essentially good for you, serving you, that's the word that I'm looking for, serving you, into something that is actually not serving you. And it's often, and bringing in a point that you just said before, Shayna, it's like, it's almost not as if, not until we see it in the rearview mirror, that we just go, oh, actually, that wasn't the best decision that I made. And, like, I feel like a piece of shit because of that. This is, like, I love how you introduced what you do. Because this is so fundamental to us all, and what it means to be a gay queer man, but also what we can think we need to be a gay queer man to feel accepted within the wider community.
Yeah.
And
I think one of the things that's so interesting with loneliness too is you might look at your life and think, well, I shouldn't feel lonely because I have all these friends, or oh, I shouldn't feel lonely. I've got a partner, and like, why do I still feel lonely? But there's been like, I feel like new is not really, because it's like in the last 10, 15 years. So it's like not super new, but like this idea of this social loneliness versus emotional loneliness. And so emotional loneliness is like, I need that one person. I need that very best friend or my partner. And then when you don't have that person in your life, you feel lonely, even though you have 50 friends that you know who you're going to go party with at Pride. But without that, you might still be feeling that craving for that one special person, or you might have that one special person and then feel bad that you still feel lonely because you wish you had a bigger social network. And I feel like that's something that I'm like kind of trying to get into in my research as well, to try and understand, is there a difference for like what we see in terms of behavioral outcomes? Does it matter? Like, are people going out and having more risky sex when they're looking for that one special person? Or, I mean, given the way that networking can often happen among gay and queer men, where like sex can be a big part of building your network.
yeah,
Building a bigger social network also related to having the kinds of sex that aren't very fulfilling. I don't know. I don't know yet.
Yeah, yet. I love the yet. Like, please keep intellectually curious, please. Like, and keep doing what you're doing in terms of like following that intellectual and feels to me like personal curiosity, because we all know that gay handshake, and sometimes, and I've got content on this, it's so hard. It's so, we don't know, we can forget how to make friends. And one of the things that we tend to do is have sex with someone and then go, oh, well, there's no real spark there. So like, but we could be good friends. We could be friends, but you know, there's nothing like beyond that. And you know, it's used as a vetting kind of mechanism, you know, a way of vetting people. But then we can be, when we do have kind of, you know, special feelings for you know, a special guy, then, you know, but we're like, oh, do we like, are they friend material? Are they, you know, something more than that? Like, we can kind of tie ourselves into knots, because we're like unsure of, you know, whether the spark of connection is actually like a romantic or a platonic spark. And so often in my work that I see is like people are paralyzed at that point because they don't know how to make friends without sex. And yeah, like, you know, forgotten how to do that because that's the way that they've done that maybe since adolescence or whatever, or the thought, the belief that that's what they need to do. So this is like such rich sort of social, I want to say minefield, but you know, it is so much content in all of this. But viewer, listener, I've got some content on how to make friends as a gay man. And one of the bits of advice is like, yeah, it sucks. Like that confusion is there, but you know, like knowing your boundaries and communicating those boundaries helps in setting expectations, which are possibly sometimes, like, expectation settings are sometimes the most unsexy thing, but it also makes it very clear for everyone as you're sort of engaging socially with other people. But in your work, Shayna, how does loneliness and the need for connection drive some gay and queer men to take risks?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, that's the question I'm hunting, right? Like,
Yeah.
I think that we've touched on it a little bit, right? Like the feeling loneliness feels shit. It feels awful. And so, you know, our person, our guy who's listening, who feels quite lonely, might be willing to do lots of different things to try and get rid of his feeling of loneliness because it feels yucky. It doesn't feel good. I have a small child now, as I say. It feels yucky. It doesn't feel good.
That's awesome.
But I mean, there's kind of like this twofold issue, right? Because now you're going out and you're seeking sex that isn't fulfilling that need, right? You're coming home from that hookup and you're feeling more empty. That didn't fill your bucket. That wasn't actually what you needed. But at the time when you were feeling that intense loneliness and you got out your phone and you went on Grindr or you went on Scruff, or you went to the bathhouse or you went cruising at a club, you thought that was going to help you feel better. And you really convinced yourself it was going to help you feel better. But like that's this kind of like trying to get rid of those feelings of loneliness by whatever means available to you, or that feels available to you, or that feels necessary to you in that moment. That's where you're ending up having sex that not only isn't fulfilling that need, but also is opening you up to risk because you're so desperate to have that sense of connection and feel that feeling of intimacy with another person. You might be afraid to stand up to or to speak against what you think that they want, or to say like, well, actually, I actually only use condoms. If you think that person's going to say no, that becomes a scary thing to ask for. Or if you said like, hey, you're going to use a condom, and they're like, what? No. Now, like, it feels scary to say like, no, but I need you to use one.
Mm-hmm.
Or, you know, it feels scary to bring up these kind of risky conversations because you're afraid that person's going to say like, oh, well, then I don't want to have this hookup, and they're going to walk away, and then you're going to feel devastated. And so it puts you in this situation where you don't feel like you can advocate for yourself. And maybe you don't want to use condoms when you have sex, but maybe you are taking PrEP or taking PrEP on demand. Maybe PrEP's not available to you. Maybe there's different things you want to do to kind of mitigate your risk, but it becomes harder to have these conversations because now you've in your mind you've elevated the stakes for whether or not this person says no. And you should always feel like you can advocate for yourself and say the kind of sex you want to have. And if the other person says no and walks away, you should be able to weather that storm. Except when you're feeling a lot of loneliness, it becomes harder to do that. It becomes hard. The idea of like turning somebody away feels crazy because you're like, but I really need to be with this other person. How can I say something that might chase them away?
Yeah. This is so common. And I think particularly the example there of the condoms, like this is just so common. And I want to say near universal, because we know the rates of HIV infections are reducing. And indeed, here in Australia, HIV is more prevalent in amongst heterosexual men than it is amongst men in the rainbow communities. And but still, here in Australia, just sort of getting on my soapbox here, gay and queer men are still banned from donating blood.
Yeah.
I know that's changed in Canada, but
Only
here
a
in
little bit.
yeah, but here in Australia, there's been no movement. You could have been in the UK during Mad Cow, and you can now give blood, but not if you're engaged in anal sex here in Australia. And but this, while HIV infections are going down, we do have increased STI transmissions of, syphilis, gonorrhea, chlamydia, and all of those. But what we're finding, I think, sort of anecdotally, and I wonder if you've got more than more empirical data than my sort of anecdotal. I could make up a random stat now, but it seems to me that conversation at that point, and those points where we have those forks in the road of like, well, does this go on? Like, do I continue, or do I go, well, no, actually, that's not okay. I would rather walk away and risk further disconnection, further loneliness, than putting myself at risk. And I feel that what you're saying there about the condoms, and I am, in my mind, and I'm sure the listener and the viewer is in their mind, at that point, replaying moments where there's that conversation it might not be a verbal conversation, but a mental conversation within themselves. Like, oh, really? I'd prefer you to put a condom on. And yeah, because and the number of times, the guy's like, well, I'm on PrEP, so I don't need to put a condom on. It's like, well, actually, like, PrEP doesn't cover against chlamydia and all of the other STIs.
Yeah, and we're having a massive syphilis outbreak in Canada.
Oh yeah,
yeah, because PrEP doesn't protect against syphilis.
no, and it is this. I really want to come to that point, and like, I didn't mean to not speak in puns there, but I really want to like concentrate on that point where we might actually be have gone to all the effort. There may have been a fair bit of like flirting on the chat. There may have been a bit of a spark of connection, or he just may have been like the guy who was like saying, oh, all right, let's just do it. But how courageous we need to be in that moment when we are experiencing loneliness to go, no, you know what? I am worthy.
Yes.
What part does worthiness in your mind play in the thoughts and feelings of loneliness and taking risks?
I think it's really important. I think that some of the stigma around loneliness, even if you're not sure that loneliness is why you're not feeling great about yourself, it's like this feeling of not being worthy of social connection can play a role for a lot of guys, and it saps your confidence, it saps your self-esteem. And like, one of the things that we found in one of the studies that my mentor Trevor Hart led, we called it the GPS. It was about helping gay men living with HIV, building their confidence, building their strength, building their self-confidence, and that was the focus of the intervention, was working with them, doing kind of group therapy, group sessions, and helping them realize their self-worth again, because living with HIV, they were experiencing a lot of stigma. They were really not feeling worthy. And what we found was we measured like a bunch of different stuff. And when we took a look, what Trevor found was that these guys who they had spent time building up their self-worth, building up their confidence, they were actually saying that they were better able to advocate for themselves in sexual situations. And we found, even though the intervention, never did we say like, you should use condoms more, they were reporting they were using condoms more because they felt stronger in sexual situations. They were able to advocate for themselves and speak up and say if they want to use condoms, that they wanted to use condoms. And to me, that finding was huge. As a researcher who does a lot of work related to condom negotiation and condom use, I was like, okay, what? All you did was build up their confidence and build up their sense of self-worth, and they were better able to negotiate for safer sex when they wanted safer sex.
Worthiness. One of the shit things about loneliness is that at its very core, it can make us question our worthiness for love and belonging. And, you know, I'm very firmly of the view that that is at the heart of the stigma. Because, you know, in saying I'm feeling a bit lonely, can we have a chat? Which substitute lonely for hunger, feeling a bit hungry, let's go and eat. Right? But if that stops us from doing that, from normalizing the thoughts and feelings that we all feel, however we identify as a human, we all feel it from time to time. But because at its very core, the thoughts and feelings of loneliness make us question our worthiness for love and belonging. That is hardly the conversation starter that makes people go, yeah, I want to hang out with you. Like, you know, or makes us want to hang out with other people because we don't feel that we're worthy of that. And so not only can we treat ourselves like the monologue within our minds going, yeah, you're a piece of shit. You know, you don't deserve being taken care of. You don't deserve me taking care of you because like you're just going to still be an idiot. or you know, however the voice shows up. Let alone going, you know, like you are unworthy of being loved. It's heavy.
Yeah, it's really heavy.
And it's horrible. And when we finally get to that, like that point of, you know, is the condom going on or not? Like how tough it can be if we are really, really at our very core believe that we are unworthy of love and belonging. It's like, well, you know, I'm
of safety.
Yeah. That's feeling really heavy for me.
That feels really heavy to me too.
And yeah, like I know in my mind right now and in my heart right now, I'm replaying conversations. And I'm extremely, extremely grateful for the work that I did before coming out. I came out as lonely first. And then after a few years, like, you know, worked through thoughts and feelings and like built up my sense of worthiness for all that is good. And took a lot of work, took a lot of like actually like proving to myself what sometimes those around me took as self-evident truths about myself. It's like I was the last to believe it. But part of that process was like going, one of the layers of the onion skin is like, my sexuality. Right, now I have to deal with that. Shit. Like, and the closer you get to the core of the onion, the harder it is, right? But, you know, and this was like one of the last layers of the fill onion. There's still plenty there, like I'm sure, but this was a big one. And so when I did come out and I started having sex with men, and that point of negotiation, which is possibly the most unsexy term, like at the point of like having sex, but and you know that negotiation is like, no, you're putting it on, like because and I'm so grateful that I had done that work on my worthiness.
Yeah.
And I got to the point and I realized that the listener might actually be going, well, good for you, Phil. Like, bully for you. This is fantastic. But this is the heart of the work that I do. Knowing that you are worthy. Doing what you can to always to stoke that flame of worthiness within, to stop blowing it out, to stop expecting others to light that flame for you, can help us make decisions knowing without question that we are worthy of love, belonging, of all that is good, and of having good people in our lives, including ourselves, who are taking, who are investing in ourselves. And that can seem absolutely impossible when we're in the depths of loneliness.
Yeah. And I mean, this kind of relates to like a paper I was reading this week about the importance of social safety and getting those cues from your environment that the place that you're in is a safe space where you can be yourself, and you know you're not going to experience any discrimination or prejudice. And it was really interesting because it was talking about how it's not just important to not have anybody say anything bigoted to you. It's important for people to say things that make you know that you're in a safe space. And I think that's one of the reasons why it feels so good and so much better to be in spaces that are explicitly queer spaces.
Yeah.
Like that's why we have neighborhoods. It's when you go to that coffee shop, like this is the queer coffee shop, or one of the queer coffee shops, hopefully one of.
Yeah.
You join a queer sports league because you're going to be playing volleyball with other people like you who understand you and see your worth and accept you for who you are. Like that's why making the time to go and interact in queer spaces with other queer people can be so valuable in ways that people maybe don't even realize, because you might think, look, yeah, I'll go to work and everyone's nice to me and it's fine. But is it an explicitly socially safe place, or is it just not ambiguously not dangerous?
Yeah.
Finding those really safe spaces that reinforce your worthiness. But I think that's important.
I simply love this because reinforcing worthiness is so easy, so much easier to say than it is to do. And worthiness is something like, we're talking about decision points. When you know your worth and you can make decisions based from that kind of foundation.
Yeah.
Knowing that, the alternative makes me question my worth. And I wonder, I mean, that's the stuff right there. I was about to say that's the shit, but that's it right there. And there's something that I want to say to the viewer and the listener right now, is that it might actually feel that the flame of worthiness within you is out. And it might actually be that you're feeling lonely because, every time that spark of worthiness, in the campfire in your soul has been lit, that you feel like you're unworthy of it. So you blow it out yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And someone comes along, whether it's like some awesome Australian guy on a podcast and does his thing to with a flaming torch, lights kind of Olympic flame style. Your worthiness campfire within that warms you. And you're like, oh, I'll let him do that, but I'll go out into the world and stuff. And I'm like, no, I'm not worthy of this anymore. I'm blowing it out. So others can do what they can to feed that fire for you, but you're just blowing it out. It's really important, not easy, but really important that you do what you can to stoke that fire, light it and stoke that fire, because it's no one else's job but yours. And it's like the job of life.
Yeah.
Because if you can walk away from a situation where you are compromising who you are, compromising your own safety, putting yourself at physical, mental, emotional, social risk in the hope that the return on that investment is feeling less lonely, I want to say, it's a gamble. Because there's no, like, that doesn't seem to be a safe bet. There was something that you said then, Shayna, that I was like, oh, I've got a question, and I kind of like tripped myself up, but I finished the thought that I had, and now I can't remember my question. But that exploration of the safe spaces.
Yeah.
I think that's so powerful. And, you know, when we're recording this, it is Pride Month. And, well, it's, you know, any activities here in Australia, like, generally inside, because it's winter. And we generally have our Pride stuff in February, March, around the Sydney Mardi Gras, when it's warm. However, you know, certainly on my feed, it's full of, you know, parades and you know, people living their best lives in warmer climes right now.
Yes.
But how important, the question that I want to say here is, like, you know, how important is it to cultivate those kind of safer spaces when sometimes the listener, the viewer, might only want to engage with other gay humans, not in the community, but, you know, in the bedroom, like when they're, or you know, in the cruising spot, or whatever it is, in the sauna or whatever, and it's kind of like, oh God, I just need to sort of get this done. How
I read on
important?
this topic, oh, sorry.
No, please.
The more I read on this topic, the more I'm convinced that it's really important to spend time in queer spaces in a non-sexual way, to just kind of like spend some time just soaking up being in an environment where you're wanted and your worth is seen and you're welcomed. A lot of my work is related to sexual minority stress as well, and how this creates, sometimes described it as creates like a chronic stress. I'm also reading some stuff that talks about how like it creates an immune response, like an inflammatory response that like impacts your immune system, and loneliness impacts your immune system too. So now if you're like in places that don't explicitly give you this sense of social safety and you're lonely, now like what's going to happen with your immune system? It's not good. So I love the idea of, you know, going to the gay sports league, showing up at Pride, showing up at a Pride event, going to a drag show as like a way of, as like a health tonic. I love that idea of like, you need to spend time in queer spaces for your health. I'm getting more and more convinced that we need to start prescribing. I'm not allowed to prescribe things. I'm just a social psychologist, but
just a social psychologist. I think, yeah, one of the things, I mean, you've heard of social prescribing.
Yes. That's what I thought of as a Kipper card and social prescribing, because I was reading some of his stuff about that.
Yeah. And so Kiffer, so viewer, listener, Kiffer is at Simon Fraser University in Vancouver in BC. And he he also is involved in the human connection movement, really, in Canada. And Kiffer, if you're listening, hello. And I want to say both in Canada, but also I'm seeing some stuff out of the NHS in the UK about, and more stuff happening here in Australia about social prescribing. And there's going to be some content on this coming up in a Connection Espresso. But I want to say this, that it's my understanding, and please correct me, Shayna, if I'm wrong, or when I'm wrong, but social prescribing is, you don't need a prescription pad. You don't need a doctorate. You don't need to have gone to a university and studied for a very long time and be a member of the Royal College of General Practitioners to prescribe this. It is essentially when someone is feeling lonely, saying you need to do connection. You need to prioritize your social health. And another Canadian, Cassie Killam, is doing fantastic work on social health, and I want to be speaking to her on the podcast to talk about social health and the importance of maintaining social health. But social prescribing is essentially the doctor, without a prescription, saying to patients who they suspect are experiencing loneliness, you might want to, I don't know, go gardening. You might want to line dance. You might want to, I don't know, volunteer at a animal shelter or a homeless shelter. You might want to, essentially get yourself more socially active. Am I on the money there, Shayna?
Oh yeah, exactly. I'm also been reading a lot about pets, and I wonder if we're going to start prescribing a dog to folks, because I've stumbled into this very interesting little pile of literature about loneliness and pet ownership, and how having a dog, so qualitative research that people are saying in interviews about how the dog gets them out of the house, which is important. And also, I don't have a dog, but my parents have a dog. And when I visit my parents and we walk the dog, she's like, oh, that's Max's mom. Oh, that's Biscuit's dad. Oh, here's Muddy Waters. I hope that dog, that's the name of one of the dogs in their neighborhood.
Muddy Waters.
Muddy Waters is the name of the dog. But she gets to know all of her neighbors that have dogs. And I see it in Toronto as well. Like the dog parks are packed, and I don't know. My kid likes to look at the dogs in the dog park.
Yeah.
So, but you see all the owners getting together in the dog park.
It is, it's so great. And one of the things about loneliness and getting out is not only it takes so much effort to get out of the house, particularly if it's cold. And content just before last Christmas, I'm like, here's how to get through the festive season. And it's like, you've got to get out. You've got to get out of the house. And I know, when it's summer, you put a t-shirt on, you put I don't know, maybe some sneakers on or whatever, and you're good to go. It's you could be out of the house in 5 minutes. But when it's cold, you've got to put everything on and, get out. And it just when it's cold and dark, it's just harder to get out. But it's not only the physical act of getting out of the house, it's the mental act of getting out of your head. And a dog, I can really see how the dog actually helps move the focus from the thoughts that are going on in your head and the feelings that are in your heart, sort of going, oh, no, I'm that's now out of me. So I think, that feels like it's an important part of social prescribing, is not only getting you out of the four walls, the place that has been keeping you safe, but has become your prison, and helping you get out of your head and your heart, and allowing sort of fresh air in.
Yeah.
I love that. I hope my kids aren't listening to this. So my ex-wife has a dog over at her house, and the boys who are now 16 have been not pestering, but they're just like the number of reels that I'm being sent on the family's Instagram chat about cute dogs. The hint has been taken. But I just know that as the person who works from home, that dog is going to be like, another responsibility for me.
It's high maintenance. That's why we didn't get it out. We thought we'd just dive right in with the baby and just not no dog. We'll just go right for the baby. But even like the transition to parenthood can be very lonely as well. And they tell parents, like, if when you're on parental leave, like, you need to make sure you leave the house once a day if you can, or more, because you need to go out and breathe that fresh air, let that fresh air in. And I've been really lucky because I got connected with a group of local parents. And so I've got, I still bring my baby to Song Circle, because that's a big source of social support and social connection for me, is chit-chatting with the other neighborhood parents after Song Circle. I'm like, I guess the baby likes the music, but I like chatting with with my friends and having my baby play with their babies afterwards.
Yeah. And listener, viewer, I work from home. And I make a point every single day of going for a walk, like at lunchtime, getting out of the house. I walk a lot, and I'm that guy. And there's content coming up on this too. I'm that guy who says good morning to everyone going past. And there's from that same conference in Canada, there was someone, and I forget her name, from UBC in Vancouver, who has done research on the power of essentially saying hello on three parties: the person saying it, the person receiving it, and people witnessing it. Everybody gets a connection boost, even if they're not directly involved, but they're witnessing it. And it's the simplest thing to do is to say good morning or g'day, whatever it is, insert locally appropriate greeting where you are in the world. But there's so much power in that, in taking steps to feeling more connected and stoking that worthiness.
Mm-hmm.
Because so often we narrowly define that connection as a gay or queer man as sexual connection. And, which has us at that point of I feel that I really need this guy.
Yeah. I really need this hookup.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And because if I don't, the consequences of or the implications of not having it are far too hard for me to sit with. And it's not really the time and space right now to have this kind of internal monologue, like the pros and cons. Because what did you say right at the beginning, Shayna? It's there's hot
cognition and cold cognition.
Yeah.
When you're stuck in hot cognition, it is you need to set yourself up when you're in a cold cognitive state. You need to set yourself up and say, okay, if this happens, I will do this. If this happens, I will do this. You need to kind of pre-program. You need to set up your responses. And so you have to spend some introspective time thinking in advance. Okay, if I ask for a condom and he says no, I'm going to say this. If he says this, I will say this. Some of the work that I did on condom negotiation was about condom refusal, and I had a great session presenting with one of the AIDS community organizations in Toronto that specifically works with East and Southeast Asian men, and we had a great time looking through some of the reasons that guys give when they don't want to use a condom, and they just were like, oh, yeah, I've heard that. Oh, I've heard that one. I've heard that one. And they talked about how just looking at my list of common excuses that partners might give, they found that very empowering and powerful, because they were like, oh, I've never seen it like written out like this. And when
Mm.
you kind of like look at something like that, you can be like, okay, so if he says this, I'll say this. If he says this, I'll say this. Which feels very boring to have like sex homework for yourself. But if having safer sex is important to you, maybe you want to do some safe sex homework with yourself. Set
Yeah.
yourself up for success when you're in like that cold cognitive state to like know what you're gonna say.
Yeah. I think this sort of half answers my final question for you, and that is like, what can we do? What can we do? And I feel, so we are making decisions based on knowing and living from a place of worth.
Yeah.
And going, okay, like, all connection is risky. There is risk in that. And that's part of why it's so hard to do it. There's the risk of judgment, there's the risk of, rejection, but there's also the risk of acceptance.
Mm-hmm.
And and stuff, but it's those negative risks that often can stop us from doing something, or kind of not deliberately half-assing it, but like sort of getting cold feet halfway through something and just going, oh my God, like this is terrible. I feel that there's some really good stuff, some advice in that cold cognition and hot cognition, sort of dichotomy. No, but those points. And what kind of homework would you prescribe in a social prescription way, like that we can do, that we can all do, when we're, potentially experiencing loneliness and finding ourselves at that point of taking a risk?
Yeah. I think thinking about where your line is and telling yourself you're going to hold that line no matter what the risk, which is so scary and so hard. And I think recognizing that it's going to be hard and it's going to be scary is an important piece of that homework, of like knowing, like, so that you're not blindsided by like, this feels really hard, this feels really scary to say no, or to like hold my line, it feels really scary. I think knowing that it's going to feel scary can help prepare you, but also spending some time thinking about your worth and what's important for you and what kinds of connections are going to be valuable for you. Because I'm not here to say like, don't go and hook up with people if you want to hook up with people, but I want you to feel good after you hook up with people. I want that to have been fun. I don't want you to feel more empty afterwards. And I think that I am going to socially prescribe people to go to Pride events and show up and be in queer spaces, spend some time in queer spaces to know that you're safe and you're worthy and you're accepted. Spend some time in places where you feel accepted and people are recognizing your worth. Not that they're not spaces where you feel tolerated, spaces where your worth is known, where you can tell people are happy you're there. Spend some time.
I've got chills. And yeah, it is brilliant, because the key, I really strongly feel, Shayna, listener, viewer, I really strongly feel, to the connection that we need is knowing and then living from that place of worth and worthiness for love and belonging. Fundamentally, like, we can't question it. Like, it is a given. It is a given, and we can't question our worthiness, but we do.
Yeah. And
All the
everyone
time.
does. Yeah. It's important to know everyone does. You're not the only one.
Yeah. 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 So knowing that we're not the only people experiencing that kind of awful feeling from time to time where we've questioned our own worth and worthiness for love and belonging, how great it can be to show up for other people and going, you know, here's a reminder to remind you of your worthiness. Not like I'm giving you this, but I'm reminding you that you're worthy. And, you know, feels like you've forgotten how worthy you are. So here's like 5 ways that I think they're all bloody awesome, that is unique to you. And, you know, kind of like the burner on a stove that like lights up, if that kind of reignites someone's sort of campfire of worthiness within their own soul, they're great. Great. But when we begin to take steps to be in places, and the word that you used there was where we are known, where we are accepted, celebrated for being, frankly, a clusterfuck of humanity in like our own beautiful individual ways, and not tolerated. Not merely tolerated, you know.
Yeah.
Tolerance is not like the gold standard. Tolerance is the bare minimum.
The bare minimum. I was going to say the same thing. Yeah.
Yeah. But when we're experiencing loneliness, like we can spend time in places where we are not even tolerated. We're not accepted. We're not like, we're not, we're our presence is not even welcome. We can, you know, because we don't feel that we're worthy of more.
Yeah.
I think, Shayna, it feels to me that this is a conversation that we really needed to have. And I'm so glad and I'm so grateful that you're here for it. I really want to stay in contact. And I want to hear from you how your work continues.
Yeah.
Because I feel like it is so relevant.
Oh gosh, thank you. That's so nice. I feel very seen.
Good. Because it is so important. What you do really like supports humans.
Well, it doesn't do any good if I just sit and my papers live on my computer and go out to academic journals. So coming and talking with people on podcasts and videos is the only way that my work, or a great way, could be the only way, is a very important way for my work to like actually get to people's ears, because not everyone wants to read an academic journal article, and I respect that.
Yeah. And I have this conversation with people in loneliness spaces as well. Like, you know, I've got a public policy background. I was an Australian public service servant for 23 years. I've got a postgrad in public policy. Like, I get the nexus, the important relationship. Nexus, there's a public servant word. But I get the relationship between academics and public policy. Like, we need an evidence base to then enact good public policy that serves people. But when it comes to loneliness, when it comes to the human experience, the person experiencing loneliness on the couch at 8:30 at night, or like when it's like when the lonely hour, you know, they're not going Googling like the latest research from Guelph, the University of Guelph, or, you know, Simon Fraser University or Universität Mainz in Germany, whatever it is, wherever it is, and like going, oh, well, statistically, here's the stats that tell me that I'm not alone. Oh, I feel better now. They go looking on social media.
Yeah.
Like they pick up the phone, they go looking on the gram, they go looking at Grindr, to alleviate the thoughts and feelings. And if there are like just little messages that we can give someone to go, you are not broken, you are human, having a pretty shitty human moment, but that makes you even more human and worthy, because like humans are always worthy.
Yeah.
So that
And if
you're
you see
doing
my
it.
study ad on Grindr, please participate and help
Yes.
me.
And so is that only in Canada? Like, are the settings only in Canada for that, or is it global?
I am not sure. I would need to check with my study coordinator. I'm very lucky to have a study coordinator who has been taking care of a lot of this for me while I've been in my mat leave fog.
Yeah.
But I'm not even sure if we have any research studies links live. I know we have a research study live right now. I'm not sure if we're advertising on Grindr right now, but
Okay.
we do love to have community members participate in our research, especially people who are real human people and not robots, because that gives us much better data that we can
Yeah.
use.
Yes. Love it. Love it. And honestly, if there's a way that I can support that, please do let me know. And particularly if it is only in Canada, like there are a lot of Canadian gay and queer men who follow, who listen, who follow me on socials, and anything that I can do to help and support, help humans, however we identify, feel less lonely or learn from our loneliness to get the connection that we need. I'm totally here for it. It's what I'm absolutely like I'm called to do.
Amazing.
So, Shayna, thank you so very much for spending some of your time and expertise with us connecting over coffee today. How can people find you?
I am sporadically active on Twitter. My Twitter account's at Shaynagram, like Instagram, but Shaynagram. And cheesy. I set that Twitter account up when I was in grad school. But I also have a website. If you just Google, because I have such a weird last name, it's my parents' last name's hyphenated. If you could just Google my name, you will find I have a website where I've got some links to some of my research articles, some hilarious photos of me trying to take serious headshots. But yeah, I can also be reached via email. I'm always happy to chat with people. So yeah, please reach out, look me up.
No worries. I'll put some links, like Shaynagram. I think that's awesome, and to your website on the show notes. But thank
Oh,
you.
and if you ever see a research article that you're interested in reading, whether it's mine or anybody else's, always email the author, because we don't get paid to publish those research articles, and we are very happy to send free copies to anybody who asks for one. So don't buy them because we don't get, it's not like a book. Please email us. Email every single researcher who you ever find their research article, because we're very happy, and you don't even have to read it. I mean, the research articles are not always great. They're not good bedtime reading, but that's just my plug for like, ask for things, ask people for things, put yourself out there.
Love it. Shayna, what an absolute joy, honor, and such a sheer bloody privilege to spend some time with you, to hear your wisdom. Please continue to follow your passion. Please continue to do what you do for humans, but more specifically for gay and queer men, because it is so needed. And I cannot wait to see what you do, but more importantly, see how you are in the years ahead.
Thank you so much. My pleasure.
YouTube, wasn't that awesome?
That was
And
great.
yeah, just thank you so much, YouTube, for joining us. If you've got any questions, fire away in the comments, all that kind of stuff. You know what to do. And until next time, be awesome. And just remember, you are so worthy of love and belonging. Like without question, it is absolutely fundamentally true. All right. Until next time, YouTube, be awesome.